That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day on the road became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, we show that behind the engines and the leather, there are still human hearts. The rain had just stopped, leaving the parking lot of Millie's diner slick and gleaming under the pale November sun. Puddles mirrored the gray sky, and the air hung heavy with the scent of wet asphalt and cooling exhaust. It was the kind of small-town stopover where truckers nursed black coffee and locals avoided eye contact, a forgotten stretch of highway on the edge of nowhere. Inside, the jukebox hummed a forgotten country tune, its notes muffled by the clatter of plates and the low murmur of voices. Emma Harlan wiped down the counter for the third time that shift, her hands moving on autopilot. At 22, she was the diner's quiet fixture, long brown hair tied back in a loose ponytail, uniform faded from too many washes. She had that look about her, the one that said life had already taken more than its share. A faint scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood fall. Eyes that darted away when anyone got too close. Her shift started at dawn, ended late, and in between she poured coffee for strangers, smiled through the tips that barely covered rent for her cramped apartment above the laundromat. No family nearby, no one to lean on, just the road and its endless parade of faces. Outside, the lot was emptying out. A few rigs idled, their drivers stretching legs before hitting the interstate. Then came the rumble, not the deep growl of semis, but something sharper, like thunder rolling in from the hills. 47 bikes pulled in, a silent convoy that parted the morning mist like a shadow. The Iron Hawks. They weren't the type to announce themselves with whoops or revs. They just arrived, leather vests patched with their emblem, a hawk in flight against a stormy sky, engines cutting off one by one until the lot fell quiet again. Jax Harlan led them, though he never said as much. At 48, he was the anchor, broad-shouldered with salt and pepper hair cropped short under his helmet. His face carried the lines of too many miles, eyes shadowed from nights that stretched too long. The Hawks had been riding together for years, a loose brotherhood forged in the fires of lost jobs, broken homes, and the kind of regrets that only the open road could swallow. They weren't outlaws in the stories people whispered. They fixed bikes in a garage off the highway, helped with community rides for kids, kept to themselves. But the world saw leather and beards and judged accordingly. Thugs, drifters, trouble on two wheels. They filed into the diner, boots thudding softly on the linoleum, claiming the back booths without a word. Jax nodded to Emma as she approached with the pot, her steps hesitant. "Coffee, black," he said, voice gravelly but kind, like worn flannel. She poured, careful not to spill, and caught the faint glint of a silver ring on his hand. A simple band, worn thin. No one else noticed. The Hawks ordered eggs and toast, ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the scrape of forks and the occasional low chuckle. Emma moved between tables, refilling mugs, her mind already drifting to the end of her shift. It happened fast, too fast for the diner to react. Across the lot, near the edge where the gravel met the woods, a group of locals, 4 of them, rowdy from the night before, had spotted Emma earlier. They were the kind who lingered in towns like this, hanging out at the bar down the street, picking fights to feel big. Tommy Reed led them, a wiry guy in his late 20s, with a perpetual scowl and a chip on his shoulder the size of the county. He'd been eyeing Emma all week, muttering slurs under his breath when she turned away. Today, as she stepped out back for a smoke break, wiping flour from her apron, they followed. The air was still, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. Emma lit her cigarette, inhaling deeply, the smoke curling like a fragile shield. She didn't hear them at first. The crunch of boots on wet stone, the low jeers. "Hey, sweetheart," Tommy called, his voice slurred with last night's beer. She froze, hand trembling as she dropped the lighter. They circled her, shadows lengthening in the weak light. Words flew, crude, cutting, about her looks, her job, her life. She backed away, heart pounding, but the wall of the diner pressed against her spine. Inside, Jax paused mid-bite, fork hovering. His eyes flicked to the window, where the figures blurred against the glass. The other hawks followed his gaze, a ripple of tension passing through the group. No one moved. Not yet. They watched, silent as stone, the diner's warmth suddenly feeling like a cage. Emma's voice carried faintly, a plea, sharp and breaking, then a scuffle, the thud of something hitting flesh. Muffled sounds followed. A gasp, the wet smack of rain-puddled ground meeting body. She went down hard, curls of smoke still rising from her abandoned cigarette, now sodden in the dirt. The bullies laughed, a hollow bark that echoed off the trucks. They lingered a moment, kicking at the gravel near her still form, before sauntering off toward their beat-up pickup, convinced no one had seen. Unconscious, Emma lay there, cheek pressed to the cold asphalt, a thin trickle of blood mixing with the rainwater. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, the world narrowing to the ache in her ribs and the distant roar in her ears. Jack set his fork down, the clink loud in the sudden hush of the diner. The hawks exchanged glances, eyes hard, but not with anger. With something deeper, a quiet resolve that had carried them through worse. Millie, the owner, hovered at the counter, wringing her hands, but she knew better than to speak. Outside, the lot seemed to hold its breath, the puddles rippling as a breeze stirred. Jax rose slowly, the chair scraping like a promise. The Brotherhood followed, one by one, their presence filling the doorway like a gathering storm. They didn't charge out yelling. That wasn't their way. Instead, they stepped into the chill, boots silent on the wet pavement, forming a loose circle around her fallen form. Jax knelt first, his large hands gentle as he checked her pulse, the leather of his gloves creaking softly. "Easy now," he murmured, though she couldn't hear. The others stood watch, faces impassive, a wall of quiet strength against the judging eyes that might peer from the diner windows. 47 souls, bound by roads traveled and oaths unspoken, guarding what the world had discarded. In that moment, as the sun broke through the clouds in a hesitant sliver, the town began to stir. Whispers would spread later, of bikers circling like vultures, of trouble brewing. But they saw only the girl, alone and broken, and the code that demanded they stay. The rain started again, light and steady, washing the lot clean. And in the distance, engines waited, patient as the dawn. The rain pattered softly on the leather jackets of the Iron Hawks, a rhythmic hush that seemed to seal the moment in quiet. Jax's knees pressed into the damp gravel as he leaned over Emma, his gloved fingers brushing aside the wet strands of hair from her face. Her skin was pale, clammy under the faint warmth of his touch, and a shallow cut above her eye wept a thin line of blood that the downpour diluted into pink rivulets. She stirred faintly, a soft groan escaping her lips like a sigh carried on the wind, but her eyes remained closed, lost in the haze of pain. The air smelled of wet earth and motor oil, mingling with the metallic tang that always followed a fall. Around them, the Brotherhood formed an unbroken ring, their shadows merging with the gray afternoon light. There was no rush in their movements, no barked orders, just the steady presence of men who knew the weight of silence better than words. Big Mike, the burly mechanic with tattooed forearms scarred from years of wrench work, stood closest to Jax, his broad frame blocking the view from the diner's windows. He'd lost a brother to a bar fight gone wrong a decade back, the kind where bystanders looked away, and now his jaw tightened, not in fury, but in the quiet ache of recognition. Beside him, Lena's husband, Tom, a wiry veteran with a limp from Nam, scanned the lot with eyes that had seen too much indifference. The others, faces weathered by sun and road dust, held their ground, boots planted firm against the slick pavement. Millie peered out from the diner's back door, her apron twisted in her fists, the screen creaking on its hinges. She'd run this place for 30 years, watched girls like Emma come and go, ground down by shifts that never ended, and men who took what they wanted without a second thought. "Is she?" Millie whispered, her voice cracking like dry leaves. Jax glanced up, his expression unreadable under the brim of his cap. "She's breathing. Call for help, but keep it quiet." Millie nodded, disappearing inside, the phone's dial tone a faint echo in the sudden void. The Bullies' pickup rumbled to life at the far end of the lot, its engine coughing like a bad habit. Tommy Reed leaned out the window, spitting into the rain, oblivious to the figures gathered in the shadows. They peeled out, tires spraying water in arcs that caught the fading light, leaving behind only the echo of laughter that now sounded brittle, exposed. No one from the diner moved to help. Not the truckers nursing hangovers at the counter. Not the locals who'd seen it all before. The world turned away, as it always did in places like this, where survival meant minding your own road. Jax shrugged off his jacket, draping it over Emma's shoulders with a care that belied his size. The leather was heavy, warm from his body, a makeshift shield against the chill seeping into her bones. He could feel the tremor in her frame, the subtle rise and fall that spoke of fear held at bay. Memories flickered unbidden. His own daughter, lost to the streets years ago, her face too much like Emma's in the vulnerability of youth. He pushed it down, focusing on the now, the pulse steady under his thumb. "Hang in there, kid," he murmured, the words more for himself than her. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, its siren a low wail that cut through the rain like a reluctant confession. Paramedics, 2 locals in starched uniforms, pushed through the circle of bikers, their faces tightening at the sight. "What happened here?" the younger one asked, kneeling beside Jax, his kit snapping open with practiced efficiency. Jax stood slowly, giving them space, his voice even. "Some fellas got rough. She was out for a break." The paramedic glanced at the Hawks, eyes narrowing at the patches, the sheer number of them. Whispers had already started inside the diner. Trouble, they said, bikers circling like sharks. But the man said nothing, just worked, stabilizing her neck, checking for breaks. Emma's eyes fluttered open as they lifted her onto the stretcher, the world blurring into shapes and sounds. Pain bloomed in her side, sharp with every breath. But beneath it was confusion, a fog that made her reach out blindly. Jax caught her hand, his grip firm yet gentle, calluses rough against her skin. "You're safe," he said simply, and for a moment she believed him. The rain on his face, the steady blue of his eyes cutting through the haze. The paramedics wheeled her away, the gurney rattling over the uneven lot, and the Hawks parted like a tide, watching until the doors closed. Back at the garage, a mile down the road, the Hawks gathered under the corrugated roof, the scent of grease and rain-soaked metal thick in the air. Tools hung silent on the walls, half-finished bikes on lifts waiting for hands that now itched for something else. Jax wiped his face with a rag, the water from his hair leaving dark spots on the concrete floor. The Brotherhood settled into folding chairs around a scarred workbench, the kind of circle where stories unfolded without fanfare. Big Mike cracked open a couple of sodas, the hiss punctuating the quiet. "Those punks," he started, voice low. "They think no one's watching." Tom nodded, rubbing his knee absently, the old wound flaring in the damp. "Town's full of 'em. Folks see us and cross the street. But let something like this happen to one of their own? Crickets." He'd ridden with Jack since the early days, back when the Hawks were just a handful of vets piecing together a life after the service. Loyalty wasn't a word they threw around. It was in the way they shared smokes on long hauls, covered shifts when a brother mourned. Emma's face lingered in their minds now, a fragile thread pulling at the edges of their code. Jax leaned against the workbench, staring at the rain-streaked window where the highway blurred into infinity. He'd built this life on the margins, fixing what was broken, steering clear of the judgments that followed leather and chrome. But today, the line had blurred. Society saw them as the villains, the ones who'd caused the trouble, not the ones stepping in. Whispers would grow, bikers at the scene. What were they doing there? The sheriff might come sniffing, locals locking doors a little tighter. Yet in the garage's dim light, with the hum of fluorescent bulbs overhead, there was only resolve, a silent pact to watch, to protect, even if it meant standing in the shadows. As evening fell, the rain eased to a drizzle, the lot outside the garage pooling with reflections of neon from the distant sign. Jax pulled on a dry shirt, the fabric soft against his skin, and glanced at the phone on the wall. Millie had called earlier. Emma was at the county hospital. Bruised ribs, a mild concussion, but stable. No charges yet. The bullies had scattered like smoke. He hung up the receiver, the click echoing. The Hawks rose as one, engines firing in the dusk, a low chorus that vibrated through the bones. They rode out toward the hospital, not in formation but together, 47 strong, the road ahead winding like a vein of quiet justice. In the waiting room later, under the harsh buzz of lights that smelled faintly of antiseptic, Jack sat with a styrofoam cup cooling in his hands. Emma slept behind the curtain, monitors beeping softly, her face peaceful for the first time that day. A nurse passed, her steps hurried, casting a wary glance at the cluster of riders in the hall. They didn't belong here in this sterile world of forms and questions, but they stayed, a vigil woven from unspoken oaths. Outside, the night deepened, stars pricking through the clouds, and Jax wondered at the fragile line between stranger and kin, the kind that once crossed changed everything. The hospital's fluorescent lights hummed like a distant swarm, casting long shadows across the linoleum floors that gleamed with the residue of countless hurried steps. Jax shifted in the plastic chair, the styrofoam cup now empty and crumpled in his fist, its edges biting into his palm. The waiting room smelled of stale coffee and bleach, a sterile veil over the undercurrent of worry that clung to every corner. Around him, the Ironhawks had dispersed into the hallways, some leaning against walls, arms crossed, others pacing softly, their boots whispering against the tiles. They weren't intruders here. They were sentinels, invisible threads holding the fragile peace. Emma stirred behind the curtain, the rustle of sheets pulling Jax from his thoughts. He rose quietly, parting the fabric with a hand that still carried the faint grit of the garage. She lay propped on pillows, an IV line snaking into her arm, her face bruised in shades of purple and yellow that bloomed like storm clouds under her skin. The cut above her eye was bandaged now, a white square stark against her pallor. Her eyes, when they opened, were glassy, searching the dim space until they landed on him. "You," she whispered, voice raw as scraped gravel, a hand lifting weakly toward her side where the ribs ached with every breath. Jax pulled up a stool, its legs scraping softly, and sat close enough for her to see the lines etched around his eyes, not from anger, but from years of carrying weights unseen. "Name's Jax," he said, his tone steady, like the low rumble of an idling engine. "You took a bad spill out there. Docs say you'll mend." He didn't mention the bullies, not yet. Some truths needed time to settle, like dust after a ride. Emma's gaze flickered, memory surfacing in fragments, the jeers, the shove, the ground rushing up cold and unforgiving. Tears welled, unbidden, tracing clean paths down her cheeks. "Why'd you stay?" she asked, her fingers twisting the blanket, knuckles whitening. He paused, the question hanging in the air like exhaust in still dawn. Outside the window, the night pressed against the glass, headlights streaking by on the highway like fleeting regrets. "We ride together because the road don't forgive thee alone," Jax replied, his words measured, drawn from a well of shared silences. "Seen too many left in the dirt, ain't right." It was the simplest truth of the Hawks. No grand speeches, just the code woven into their patches, their rides, their quiet stands. Emma's breath hitched, a sob she swallowed back, her hand reaching out again. This time, Jax took it, his calloused grip enveloping her smaller one, warm and unyielding. In that touch, something shifted, a bridge across the chasm of stranger to something kin. Word spread through the town like oil on water, seeping into every corner by morning. At the sheriff's office, Deputy Harlan, no relation, just the cruel coincidence of names, sipped coffee from a chipped mug, flipping through reports on his desk cluttered with faded wanted posters. The call from the hospital had come in at midnight. Assault in the diner lot, victim a local girl, witnesses scarce. But the real buzz was the bikers, 47 of them, the dispatcher said, hovering like a storm cloud. "Iron Hawks," the deputy muttered to his partner, a grizzled vet named Cal with a mustache that hid his perpetual frown. "Heard their trouble. Probably scared off the real help." Cal nodded, but his eyes lingered on the window where the dawn light filtered through blinds, painting stripes on the floor. He'd crossed paths with the Hawks once, years back, when they helped tow his truck off a ditch during a blizzard. No questions, no charge. Still, the town talked. Leather-clad thugs circling a beaten girl. What were they after? Rumors twisted. Drugs, intimidation. A score settled in the shadows. The local paper's morning edition hit stands with a grainy photo of bikes in the lot, caption screaming, "Biker swarm at diner assault." Folks at the feed store shook heads over fences, mothers pulling kids closer at the sight of a vest. The world saw predators, not protectors, the stereotype a blindfold too tight to loosen. Back at the hospital, the judgment seeped in like fog. A nurse, clipboard in hand, paused at the door, her gaze sharpening on Jax as he helped Emma sip water from a paper cup. "Visiting hours are limited," she said, voice clipped, keys jingling like a warning. "Family only." Jax met her eyes, unflinching, the weight of the Brotherhood's presence echoing in the hall where Big Mike and Tom stood sentinel. "We're the family she got right now," he replied, not raising his voice. But the words carried the quiet thunder of conviction. The nurse hesitated, glancing at Emma's nod, small but there, before retreating, her steps quicker. Emma leaned back, exhaustion pulling at her features, but a spark lingered in her eyes, the first in months. "People think you're, you know," she said softly, gesturing vaguely at his vest. Jax chuckled, a low sound that rumbled from his chest, easing the tension like oil on a rusty hinge. "Yeah, seen it all my life. Rode out of the service with ghosts, built this crew from scraps. Folks see the road wear, not the repairs." He didn't elaborate on the ghosts, his daughter's photo tucked in his wallet, faded edges from too many lonely miles. But the ache was there, in the way his thumb traced the ring on his finger, a habit born of loss. By midday, the Hawks filtered in with quiet efficiency. Sandwiches from the diner, wrapped in wax paper that crinkled softly, a spare blanket from Tom's truck, smelling faintly of pine and leather. They didn't crowd her room, just nodded from the doorway, faces etched with the same resolve Jax carried. Big Mike lingered longest, his massive frame folding into a chair, telling a story of a flat tire on a desert stretch, how the crew pushed through the night. Laughter bubbled up, tentative at first, then real, cutting through the beeps and murmurs. Emma listened, her hand still in Jax's, the bruises fading against the warmth of connection. Outside, the sheriff's cruiser pulled up, lights off but presence heavy. Deputy Harlan stepped out, rain from the night before still pooling in the lot, reflecting the overcast sky. He eyed the bikes lined neatly in the visitor slots, engines cool and silent. Inside, he found Jax in the hall, arms crossed, a wall of calm. "Need to ask about the incident," the deputy said, notebook flipping open, pen poised. Jax nodded, voice even. "Ask away. But we're here for her, not trouble." The questions came, times, descriptions, motives, but Jax answered straight, no evasion, painting the picture of bystanders turned guardians. Harlan scribbled, suspicion lingering in his furrowed brow, but something in Jax's steady gaze gave him pause. For the first time, the deputy saw beyond the patches, men with hands that fixed more than broke. As the deputy left, the clouds parted briefly, sunlight slanting through the windows in golden shafts that warmed the cold tiles. Emma watched from her bed, the scene unfolding like a memory she could hold on to. The hawks gathered closer now, a circle unbroken, their silence a judgment of their own, not on the town, but on the indifference that let cruelty bloom. Jack stood at the window, watching the cruiser fade into the distance, the road calling with its endless curve. In that vigil, the moral weight settled. To protect wasn't to fight the world, but to stand firm when it turned away, revealing the heart beneath the leather. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel. The afternoon sun filtered through the hospital blinds and slanted bars, turning the room into a patchwork of light and shadow that danced across Emma's blanket. She lay still, the pain meds dulling the edges of her world to a soft blur. But her mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the day, the shove, the laughter fading into rain, and then the unexpected wall of figures around her. Jax had stepped out for air, leaving the door ajar, and now the hallway carried the low murmur of voices, the hawks trading stories in that understated way of theirs, words clipped, but laced with the weight of shared roads. Big Mike pushed the door open gently, his bulk filling the frame like a guardian oak, a paper bag in one hand that crinkled with the promise of something simple. "Brought you some real food," he said, voice rumbling soft as distant thunder, setting the bag on the tray table. Inside were ham sandwiches from Millie's, the bread still warm, mustard sharp in the air mingling with the room's antiseptic bite. Emma managed a small smile, her lips cracking slightly from the dehydration, and sat up with a wince, ribs protesting like old springs. "You didn't have to," she murmured, but her hand reached out anyway, fingers brushing his as she took the wrap. It was the first real kindness in ages, not pity, but the kind that came without strings. Mike pulled up a chair, the plastic groaning under his weight, and for a moment, they ate in companionable quiet, the only sounds the rustle of foil and the faint beep of the monitor. He didn't pry, didn't ask about the bruises blooming under her sleeve, but his eyes, dark and steady, held a question unspoken. How had she ended up so alone? Emma chewed slowly, the flavors grounding her, and felt the tears prick again, not from pain this time, but from the ache of being seen. "They come in every week," she said finally, voice barely above a whisper, staring at the window where a pigeon fluttered against the glass. Tommy and his crew, always the same, looks, comments, thought it'd pass. Her hand trembled on the wrapper, crumpling it tighter. Mike nodded, his jaw working on his own sandwich, the scar on his knuckle catching the light, a reminder of his own brushes with the rough edges of life. Outside, the parking lot hummed with activity. The Hawks' bikes lined up like silent sentries under the overcast sky. Tom leaned against his, polishing the chrome with a rag that smelled of oil and effort, his limp more pronounced in the chill breeze. The sheriff's visit earlier had stirred something in him, a flicker of the old frustration from his service days, when authority saw uniforms and assumed threat over duty. He'd watched Harlan leave with that skeptical squint, the deputy's cruiser kicking up gravel as it pulled away. Now, as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the asphalt, Tom spotted movement at the lot's edge. A familiar pickup, rusted blue, idling too long near the entrance. Tommy Reed's ride. The engine growled low, windows down, faces peering out like coyotes scenting weakness. Jax emerged from the side door, lighting a cigarette with a flick of his lighter, the flame briefly illuminating the lines of fatigue on his face. He exhaled slowly, smoke curling into the air like unspoken worries, and caught Tom's glance. No words passed. A nod sufficed, the kind that carried the weight of years. They moved together, casual but purposeful, toward the bikes, drawing the other's attention without a sound. Big Mike joined from the room, wiping his hands on his jeans, his presence a subtle shift in the air. The Brotherhood gathered loosely, not in threat, but in the quiet unity that had pulled them through breakdowns and betrayals alike. The pickup revved, tires crunching as it swung closer, stopping short of the bike line. Tommy leaned out, his scowl twisted in the fading light, eyes darting over the group with a mix of bravado and unease. "Heard you been playing hero," he called, voice laced with mockery that didn't quite hide the edge. His buddies shifted in the cab, hands gripping the dash, the air thick with the scent of cheap cologne and lingering beer. "Girls, none of your business. Town don't need your kind stirrin' shit." The words hung there, a challenge thrown like a gauntlet, but the Hawks didn't rise to it. Jax took a drag, the cherry glowing red, and stepped forward just enough to meet Tommy's gaze. "She is now," he said simply, his tone even, like gravel under tires, unyielding, but not aggressive. Tension coiled in the lot, the breeze whispering through the chain-link fence, carrying the distant wail of an approaching truck. Tommy's laugh barked out, forced, but his eyes flicked to the sheer number of them. 47 shadows blending into one formidable whole. One of his crew muttered something low, a hand twitching toward the door, but Tommy waved him off, the bravado cracking like thin ice. "Watch your backs," he spat, gunning the engine, the pickup lurching backward in a spray of pebbles that pattered harmlessly against leather. They sped off, taillights blurring into the highway's haze, leaving behind only the echo of exhaust and the faint tremor of what might come next. Back inside, Emma caught the shift from the window, her sandwich forgotten, heart pounding in rhythm with the monitor's quickened beep. Jax returned soon after, his face unchanged, but she saw it, the subtle tightening of his shoulders, the way his eyes scanned the room like he was mapping exits. "They came by," she said, not a question, her voice small against the room's hum. He nodded, sinking into the chair with a sigh that carried the day's weight. Words, nothing more, but words got a way of turning. He paused, rubbing his ring absently, the metal warm from his skin. In that moment, memory surfaced for him unbidden. His daughter, Ellie, cornered in a similar lot years ago. The helplessness that followed her disappearance like a shadow on the road. He'd failed her then, the guilt a constant companion under the vest. Now, with Emma, it was different. The Brotherhood's code demanded action, quiet and sure, a redemption he chased mile by mile. The Hawks reconvened in the hall as evening deepened, the hospital's lights buzzing brighter against the gathering dusk. They spoke in low tones, plans forming not in shouts but in nods and glances, patrols on the diner shifts, eyes on the back roads where Tommy's crew haunted. Big Mike sketched a rough map on a napkin, his pencil scratching softly, while Tom recounted a similar standoff from '82, diffused not by fists but by presence alone. Laughter threaded through, dry and brief, easing the knot of anticipation. Emma listened from her bed, the door cracked, feeling the pull of their circle, a warmth that seeped past the pain. For the first time, isolation cracked, replaced by the hum of loyalty that bound them. A moral choice to stand, even as the town whispered of impending storm. Night fell fully, stars pricking the sky visible through the window. And Jax lingered longest, watching Emma drift toward sleep. Her breathing evened, hand relaxed on the blanket, and he felt the quiet justice of it. Not vengeance, but vigilance, the kind that mended what society shattered. Outside, engines hummed to life one by one, a chorus fading into the dark, carrying the weight of protection into the unknown miles ahead. The road waited, curving with promise and peril, but in the silence of the room, compassion held firm. The moon hung low over the hospital parking lot, a silver sliver casting pale glows on the row of bikes, their chrome edges dulled by the night's damp chill. Jack stepped out into the crisp air, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that echoed in his chest. The scent of rain-soaked pine drifted from the nearby woods, mingling with the faint exhaust lingering from the Hawks' departures. Most had ridden out in pairs, engines purring softly into the distance, leaving behind a quiet that felt heavier than the silence of an empty road. Big Mike clapped a hand on Jax's shoulder, the touch brief but solid, before swinging onto his own machine. "We'll circle the diner come dawn," he said, voice low, the words carrying the weight of unspoken plans. Jax nodded, watching the taillight fade, the Brotherhood scattering like embers to guard the fringes. Inside, Emma slept fitfully, her dreams tangled with shadows, the bullies' jeers morphing into the rumble of approaching bikes, a confusion of threat and solace. She woke near midnight to the nurse's rounds, the woman's footsteps soft but insistent, flashlight beams slicing the dark like a hesitant question. "Pain?" the nurse asked, adjusting the IV with efficient tugs, her face a mask of professional detachment. Emma shook her head, though the ache in her side pulsed with every shift, a reminder of the ground's unyielding bite. The nurse lingered a moment, eyes flicking to the empty chair by the bed. "Those friends of yours? They cleared out?" Emma's throat tightened, the word friends landing like a fragile gift. "For now," she whispered, pulling the blanket higher, the fabric rough against her skin. Dawn crept in slow, painting the sky in muted grays, the highway awakening with the first semis groaning past. Jax arrived early at the diner, his bike pulling up to the curb just as Millie flipped the open sign, the bell above the door tinkling like a cautious welcome. The lot was empty save for a lone delivery truck, its driver unloading crates with grunts that echoed off the siding. Millie poured him coffee without a word, the steam rising in lazy curls, black and bitter as the thoughts churning in his mind. "She called," Millie said finally, sliding the mug across the counter, her hands steadier now, lined with the resilience of long shifts. "Discharged this morning, stubborn girl, insisted on walking home." Jack sipped, the heat grounding him, and felt the pull of the road's moral crossroads. Stay visible. Risk the town's glare, or fade into watchfulness. Emma stepped out of the hospital an hour later, the morning light harsh on her bruises, each step a negotiation with the pain that radiated from her ribs. The air tasted clean, laced with the distant tang of diesel, but freedom felt tentative, like testing ice after a thaw. She hailed a cab, her own car still at the diner, keys lost in the scuffle, and rode in silence, the driver's radio murmuring weather updates, rain chances low, but thunder possible. Her apartment above the laundromat loomed as they pulled up, the stairs creaking under her weight, each riser a small victory. Inside, the space was sparse, a sagging couch, a kitchenette with mismatched mugs, the hum of the dryers below vibrating through the floor like a constant undercurrent. She sank onto the bed, the springs protesting, and let the tears come. Quiet, held back sobs that soaked the pillow, washing away the isolation that had built like dust over years. Word of her release rippled through the town by noon, carried on phone lines and sidelong glances at the gas station. Tommy Reed heard it at the bar, nursing a beer that turned warm in his grip, the jukebox's twang mocking his unease. His crew slouched around the pool table, cues tapping idly, but the air thickened with the echo of the hospital standoff. The biker's unblinking stares. The way Jax's words had landed without heat but with iron beneath. "They're watching her place now," one muttered, chalking his tip with a scrape that set teeth on edge. Tommy's fist clenched around the bottle, knuckles whitening, the contained rage bubbling like oil in a hot pan. He'd grown up here, son of a mill worker laid off in the shutdowns, the bitterness a legacy passed down like a rusted tool. Hurting Emma had been impulse, a way to feel tall in a world that kept him small. But now the shadows lengthened, the hawk's presence a silent accusation. Jax rode alone to her building, the engine's thrum a steady companion, cutting through the midday quiet. He parked across the street, under the awning of a shuttered storefront, the leather seat warm against his back. From there, he could see the stairs, the flicker of movement in her window, a curtain twitching, the faint outline of her form. No confrontation, just vigilance, the kind forged in the Brotherhood's long nights of pulling brothers from wrecks or regrets. Memories surfaced again, uninvited. Ellie's laugh echoing from a porch swing, the day she vanished into the city's underbelly, his searches fruitless against the indifference of badges and bystanders. He'd hardened then, the vest a shield, but Emma's vulnerability cracked it, stirring the compassion he'd buried under miles of asphalt. By afternoon, the tension escalated in subtle waves. A car slowed past her building, Tommy's buddy, feigning a glance at his phone. But Jax noted the hesitation, the way it circled the block once, twice. He didn't move, just lit another cigarette, the smoke veiling his face like a partial confession. Inside, Emma sensed it too, the prickling at her neck as she peered through the blinds, heart quickening to the rhythm of the dryers below. She called the diner, Millie's voice a lifeline. "Stay put, honey, help's comin'." But the word help carried risk now, the town's judgment a double-edged blade. Whispers of biker involvement twisting into tales of coercion, the paper running a follow-up with quotes from unnamed locals. Those hawks are bad news, girls in over her head. As dusk settled, painting the sky in bruised purples, Big Mike and Tom arrived, their bikes pulling up with muffled roars. They didn't knock, just waited below, shadows merging with the lengthening evening. Emma watched from the window. The sight of them, a wall of quiet strength, easing the knot in her chest. Jax joined them, the three forming a loose perimeter, conversations low, gestures minimal. Tommy's crew appeared again, the pickup idling at the corner, headlights cutting the gloom like probing eyes. No words exchanged, just stares across the distance, the air charged with the balance of rage held in check and compassion's steady hand. A confrontation brewed, not in shouts but in the silent standoff, the moral suspense tightening like a coil. Emma descended the stairs slowly, the evening air cool on her skin, drawn by the pull of their presence. Jax turned, his expression softening in the fading light, and offered a hand, gentle, unassuming. "Not alone anymore," he said, the words a quiet vow. She took it, the connection a bridge over the chasm of fear, her evolution mirroring his. From solitary ache to the warmth of chosen kin. The pickup revved once, then retreated into the night, tires whispering retreat. But the road ahead curved with uncertainty. The Brotherhood's loyalty a beacon in the gathering dark. Redemption unfolding one guarded step at a time. The streetlights flickered to life along the cracked sidewalk, their orange glow pooling like spilled honey on the damp pavement, casting elongated shadows that twisted with the evening breeze. Emma's hand lingered in Jax's for a moment longer than necessary, the warmth of his calluses seeping through her skin like a tentative anchor. The air carried the faint hum of the laundromat below, dryers churning endlessly, a mechanical heartbeat underscoring the quiet standoff that had just dissolved. Tommy's pickup had vanished around the corner, its taillights swallowed by the encroaching night. but the echo of its engine lingered, a low growl that promised return. Jax released her hand slowly, his eyes scanning the darkened corners of the block, the lines around them deepening in the dim light. Big Mike shifted his weight, boots scraping softly against the gravel, his massive frame a bulwark against the chill that wasn't just from the air. "They'll circle back," he said, voice a rumble that blended with the distant traffic. Not a prediction, but a certainty born of too many shadowed lots. Tom nodded beside him, his limp pulling him to lean against the building's peeling siding, the wood rough under his palm. He'd seen this dance before, in bars on the edge of bases, in the haze of post-tour nights where grudges festered like untreated wounds. The Hawks didn't seek the fight. They prepared for it, their loyalty a shield forged in silences deeper than words. Emma stood between them now, her breath visible in shallow puffs, the bruises on her face hidden but throbbing in rhythm with her pulse. She glanced up at the window of her apartment, the curtains still swaying faintly from her earlier vigil, and felt the isolation of the space above like a weight pulling her back. "I can't stay cooped up," she murmured, more to herself than them, her voice threading through the quiet like a frayed wire. The diner called. Her shift started at dawn, the routine of fragile normalcy she clung to, even as fear coiled in her gut. Jax met her gaze, the blue of his eyes steady under the streetlight's wash, reflecting the moral fork they all teetered on. Retreat into safety's illusion, or face the encroaching storm with eyes open. "We'll ride with you," he said simply, the offer hanging there, unadorned, a quiet extension of the code that bound the brotherhood. The night deepened as they waited, the sky a velvet shroud pricked by faint stars, the highway's murmur a constant companion. No one spoke of plans outright. It wasn't their way. Instead, gestures filled the gaps, Big Mike pulling a spare jacket from his saddlebag, the leather still warm from the ride, draping it over Emma's shoulders with a nod that spoke of protection without possession. Tom lit a cigarette, the match flaring briefly, illuminating the scars on his hands from shrapnel long buried, and passed it to Jax, the shared smoke a ritual of resolve. Emma watched them, the circle of their presence easing the knot in her chest, her own hands trembling less now, fingers curling into the jacket's edges. For the first time, the world's indifference felt distant, countered by this unspoken vigil. Retaliation came not in a rush, but in whispers that built like thunder on the horizon. By 10, a call crackled through Jax's old flip phone. The screen's glow harsh in the dark. Millie, her voice tight over the line from the diner. "They're here, Jax. Tommy's boys, loitering in the lot, asking after her. Sheriff drove by but didn't stop." The words landed heavy, the air in the alley thickening with the scent of impending rain. Jax folded the phone shut with a snap that echoed off the bricks, his jaw setting in that contained way. Rage banked like embers under ash. "Time to move," he said, and the Hawks mounted up, engines firing in a staggered chorus that vibrated through the ground, not roaring but humming with purpose. They rode in loose formation, Emma sandwiched between Jax and Big Mike on the back of a borrowed bike, her arms wrapped tight around his waist, the wind whipping her hair like a banner of defiance. The town blurred past, neon signs flickering in shop windows, empty streets lined with sagging porches where porch lights burned like wary eyes. At the diner, the lot was a tableau of tension. Tommy's crew clustered near their trucks, bottles glinting in the overhead lights, laughter forced and brittle. They straightened as the bikes pulled in, a ripple of unease passing through them like a chill gust. Tommy stepped forward, his wiry frame silhouetted against the diner's glow, eyes narrowing at Emma's dismount, the jacket too large on her marking her allegiance. "You bringin' her into this?" Tommy sneered, voice carrying across the gravel, his buddies flanking him with postures that screamed bluff more than backbone. The air smelled of spilled beer and cooling asphalt, the jukebox inside leaking a mournful ballad through the cracked door. Jax dismounted slowly, boots hitting the ground with deliberate calm. his presence drawing the line without crossing it. "She's under our watch," he replied, words even, laced with the quiet thunder of finality. No threats, just the truth. The Brotherhood's code, a justice that operated beyond badges and judgments, rooted in the compassion that society overlooked. Tension escalated in the standoff. The Lotta stage under the buzzing lights, shadows lengthening as clouds gathered overhead. One of Tommy's crew lunged forward, a bottle raised in sloppy challenge, but Big Mike intercepted with a hand like iron on the man's shoulder, the grip firm but not crushing. A warning etched in restraint. "Walk away," Mike growled, low and steady, his eyes holding the fury in check, compassion for the misguided fool flickering beneath. Emma stood behind Jax, heart hammering, but she didn't retreat. The moral choice crystallized in her stance, to hide or stand, to let fear dictate or let loyalty forge her path. Tommy hesitated, the bravado cracking under the weight of 47 silent watchers emerging from the edges of the lot, their forms materializing like ghosts from the night. The confrontation hung on that precipice, rain beginning to fall in fat drops that pattered on leather and metal, washing the air clean. Tommy spat into the gravel, the sound lost in the downpour, and backed toward his truck, his crew following with muttered curses that dissolved into the storm. They peeled out, tires sluicing water, leaving the lot slick and echoing. The Hawks didn't pursue. Victory wasn't in chase but in the stand, the quiet compassion that de-escalated without surrender. Jax turned to Emma, rain tracing paths down his face, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You good?" She nodded, the tremble in her lips easing, the evolution from isolation to this fragile kin blooming in her chest. Inside the diner, they claimed a booth, the rain drumming on the roof like a reluctant applause, steam rising from fresh coffee that Millie poured, with hands that shook less now. Conversations flowed in low tones, stories of past rides, losses mended on the road, the Brotherhood weaving Emma into its fabric with subtle inclusions, a shared plate of pie, a laugh that bridged the gaps. But beneath it, the risk lingered, the confrontation a spark that could ignite further, the town's whispers growing, bikers escalating trouble, not quelling it. Jack stared into his mug, the reflection rippling, memories of Ellie surfacing again, her final plea for protection unmet, the guilt a shadow that this vigil chased. Redemption whispered in the rain's rhythm, loyalty's quiet justice holding the line against the dark. As the storm eased, engines idled outside once more, the Hawks preparing to escort her home, the road ahead curving with peril and promise. Emma felt the shift within, compassion awakening her own resolve, the moral arc bending toward revelation in the miles to come. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Emma reach more people who still believe in humanity. The rain had tapered to a misty veil by the time the Hawks' engines growled back to life outside the diner, their low rumble vibrating through the fogged windows like a shared heartbeat. Emma slid into the back of Jax's truck, borrowed from the garage for the short haul, its cab smelling of worn seats and faint motor oil, her body aching from the day's toll, but her grip on the door handle steady now, fingers no longer trembling. Jax drove, Big Mike riding shotgun with a thermos of coffee passed around, the steam curling up to fog the windshield in lazy swirls. Tom and a few others flanked them on bikes, headlights cutting twin paths through the night, a rolling escort that turned the familiar streets into something fortified, alive with purpose. The town slept uneasily under the overcast sky, porch lights glowing like wary eyes along the curbs, the occasional dog barking from behind chain-link fences. Emma stared out the side window, the passing neon from a closed gas station blurring into streaks of red and blue, her reflection ghosting back at her, bruised cheek shadowed, eyes wide with the weight of what she'd stepped into. The jacket Big Mike had given her hung loose, its leather a second skin that carried the faint scent of pipe tobacco and road dust, a reminder that she wasn't riding alone anymore. Why risk this? She asked quietly, her voice threading through the hum of tires on wet asphalt. Jax's eyes met hers in the rear view, steady as the wheel under his hands. Because turning away's what broke us all once, he said, the words hanging there, simple but laced with the gravel of unspoken scars. They pulled up to her building just past midnight, the laundromat sign flickering erratically, casting intermittent glows on the stairs like a stuttering confession. The bikes idled in a loose semicircle, engines purring soft warnings into the quiet, while Jax walked her up, his bootsteps echoing off the metal risers, each one measured against the creak of the night. At her door, she fumbled the key, the lock clicking open with a reluctance that mirrored her own. "Get some rest," he murmured, lingering on the threshold, the hallway light spilling yellow across his face, highlighting the salt in his stubble. Emma nodded, but as she stepped inside, a wave of vulnerability crashed over her. The empty room beyond, the shadows pooling in corners like forgotten doubts. She turned back, hand on the frame. "Will you be here in the morning?" Jax's expression softened, a rare crack in the armor, and he placed a hand on the door above hers. "Dawn, we'll ride you to the diner." Sleep came in fits, the dryer's hum below a relentless drone that blended with her dreams. Flashes of the lot, Tommy's sneer morphing into Jax's steady gaze, the rain washing away blood that wasn't quite hers. She woke before first light, the room gray and chill, pulling on her uniform with careful movements, ribs protesting like a warning. Downstairs, the Hawks were already there, silhouettes against the pre-dawn mist. Jax leaning on his bike, thermos in hand. Big Mike checking chains with methodical twists. Tom scanning the street, his limp forgotten in the focus. No fanfare, just the quiet efficiency of men who'd mended more than machines, their presence a balm against the night's lingering chill. The ride to the diner was silent communion. Emma on the back of Jax's bike this time, her arms around his waist, the wind whispering through her hair like tentative encouragement. The highway stretched empty, dawn breaking in hesitant pinks along the horizon, the air crisp with the promise of another rainy day. At Millie's, they pulled into the lot just as the first truckers arrived, their rigs rumbling in like old acquaintances. Tommy's crew was nowhere in sight, but the tension hummed beneath the surface, a current waiting to surge. Millie met them at the door, her face lined with worry, apron dusted with flour from early prep. "Sheriff stopped by last night," she said, pouring coffee into mugs with a steady hand. "Asked about you all. Said complaints are piling up, loitering, intimidation." Her eyes flicked to Emma, softening, but he knows better than to push. Jax sipped his coffee, the bitterness grounding him. But inside, the moral suspense tightened like a knot in his gut. The town was closing in, judgments sharpening into actions. A deputy patrolling more frequently, locals crossing streets at the sight of patches, whispers turning to calls for the Hawks to leave. Yet pulling back now would abandon Emma to the void, the same indifference that had claimed his daughter years ago. He pushed the thought down, focusing on the now, the way Emma moved behind the counter, pouring refills with a resilience that mirrored his own buried strength. Mid-morning brought the escalation, subtle at first. A car idling across the street, engine off but windows down, Tommy's silhouette unmistakable in the driver's seat. He didn't approach, just watched. The stare across the lot, a silent taunt that coiled the air tight. The Hawks noticed, their positions shifting without words. Big Mike wiping down a table near the window. Tom stepping out for a smoke that positioned him by the door. Jack stayed inside, nursing his mug, but his eyes never left the threat, the contained rage simmering like heat under a hood. Emma felt it too, her hands pausing mid-pour, coffee sloshing slightly, the tremor betraying her. "They're waiting for me to crack," she whispered to Jax as she passed, her voice a fragile thread. By noon, the confrontation brewed hotter. Tommy's pickup rolled in slow, parking at the lot's edge, his crew spilling out with deliberate swagger, tools from their day jobs, hammers, wrenches, clinking like veiled warnings. They lingered by the pumps, voices carrying in snatches, crude jokes laced with her name, eyes darting to the diner. The sheriff's cruiser appeared then, lights flashing once in a half-hearted show, Deputy Harlan stepping out with notebook in hand. He approached Tommy first, words low and probing, but the exchange ended with a shrug, the deputy casting a long look toward the Hawks inside. Harlan crossed the lot, boots crunching gravel, and pushed through the diner door, the bell jingling sharp. "This ends now," he said, voice authoritative but edged with unease, eyes sweeping the room. "You're scaring folks. Girl's safe. Send her home. Clear out." Jax rose slowly, the chair scraping like a drawn line, his frame filling the space without aggression. "She's working. We're drinking coffee. Nothing more." The words were calm, but beneath them pulsed the Brotherhood's code, the justice of presence when law faltered. Harlan's gaze hardened, flicking to Emma, who stood frozen by the counter, her face pale. "You involved in this mess?" he asked her, pen poised. She shook her head, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "They saved me. You didn't." The deputy faltered, the truth landing like rain on dry earth, exposing the cracks in his authority. Outside, Tommy seized the moment, his crew advancing toward the door, emboldened by the standoff. Big Mike met them halfway, his bulk a barrier, voice low. "Not today." No fists flew, but the air crackled, gestures sharp. A shove rebuffed, a wrench dropped with a clang that echoed like a gavel. Tom joined, his limp pulling him forward with grim determination, the veteran's shared history fueling the restraint that held violence at bay. Inside, Jack stepped to the window, watching the push and pull, his hand clenching the sill until knuckles whitened. The emotional turn hit then, raw and unbidden, Emma's defiance mirroring Ellie's last stand, the daughter he'd failed to shield from a similar pack of shadows in a city far from these roads. The resemblance wasn't blood, but fate's cruel echo. Emma's eyes, the way she lifted her chin, stirring the mourning he'd locked away under layers of leather and loyalty. Harlan intervened outside, barking orders that scattered Tommy's group back to their truck, the engine roaring in frustrated retreat. But as the cruiser followed them out, the deputy shot a final warning glance through the glass. "This town's watching. One wrong move." The door swung shut, leaving the diner in hushed aftermath, the jukebox's tune resuming like a sigh. Emma sank onto a stool, tears brimming but unshed, her hand finding Jax's arm. "Thank you," she whispered, the words heavy with the compassion awakening between them. He covered her hand with his, the touch a bridge to his past, the revelation stirring. In protecting her, he was mending the fracture of loss, the Brotherhood's vigil a path to his own redemption. As the afternoon waned, rain threatening again in the thickening clouds, the Hawks gathered closer, their circle tightening against the rising storm. The road curved ahead, peril and truth intertwined, but in that shared silence, humanity gleamed. Raw, unyielding, a quiet justice born of hearts that refused to turn away. The afternoon rain finally broke, scattering across the diner lot in sheets that hammered the gravel like muffled drum beats, turning the world into a blurred watercolor of grays and silvers. Inside, the air hung thick with the scent of damp leather and cooling coffee, the jukebox silenced by the storm's roar. Emma leaned against the counter, her uniform damp at the edges from a quick dash out to empty a trash bin, her ribs a dull throb that she ignored with the stubborn focus of someone reclaiming her ground. Jack stood by the window, rain tracing erratic paths down the glass, his reflection fractured like the memories stirring beneath his calm. The Hawks had thinned out after the standoff, some riding perimeter checks along the back roads, others lingering in the booths with half-eaten plates, their presence a quiet net against the fraying edges of the day. Deputy Harlan's cruiser had circled back once, lights off but engine growling low, a patrol that felt more like a warning than protection. He'd pulled Jax aside earlier, voice low under the diner's awning, rain dripping from his hat brim. "This town's on edge. You push, and it pushes back harder." Jax had met his stare, water beading on his vest like unshed tears, and replied with the weight of roads traveled. "We're not pushing, we're holding." The deputy had driven off into the downpour, taillights dissolving into mist, but the words lingered, a reminder of the chasm between the hawk's justice and the law's blind gaze. Society saw them as the storm, not the shelter, their leather a mark of menace rather than the scars of survival. Emma wiped her hands on her apron, the fabric rough against her skin, and approached Jax, her steps tentative but deliberate. The emotional turn had rooted in her since the hospital, a small act of standing firm amid the chaos. But now it deepened, pulling at the threads of her isolation. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said softly, her voice cutting through the patter on the roof. Jax turned, his eyes shadowed, the faint tremor in his hand as he gripped the mug betraying the calm. For a moment, silence stretched, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder rolling away like retreating footsteps. He set the mug down, the ceramic clinking against the sill, and drew a worn wallet from his pocket, flipping it open to a faded photo tucked behind plastic. A girl, no older than Emma, with the same loose ponytail and wary smile, standing beside a bike in sun-dappled light. "Ellie," he said, the name escaping like a breath held too long. "My daughter. Lost her 5 years back to the streets. Bad crowd, worse choices. I was on the road, chasing fixes for others, and she needed me watching." His voice cracked, raw as the rain-scoured earth outside, the revelation unfolding like a long-buried map. The Bullies' assault on Emma had cracked open that vault, the parallels too sharp, the vulnerability, the indifference of passers-by, the helplessness that clawed at a father's core. Jax's hand trembled now, openly, as he traced the photo's edge, the silver ring glinting under the fluorescent hum. "I failed her, turned away when the world did. Seeing you in that lot, it was like getting a second chance to stand." Emma's breath caught, tears welling not from her own pain but the shared ache in his words, her hand reaching out to cover his on the wallet. The diner faded around them. Millie's soft clatter in the kitchen, the hawk's low murmurs, a cocoon of quiet where morality's weight settled. She'd been alone too long, pouring coffee for faces that blurred into one another, her life a series of silent pleas unanswered. But the hawks had answered, their brotherhood a mirror to the family she'd lost touch with, revealing the compassion hidden in apparent brutality. "You're not failing now," she whispered, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat, the evolution complete. From the girl beaten in the shadows to one who chose the light of loyalty. Outside, the storm eased, sunlight piercing the clouds in hesitant shafts that steamed the puddles into mist. Tommy's crew didn't return that day, the confrontations echo enough to scatter them for now, but the risk lingered like exhaust in still air, a reminder that justice on the margins was a vigilant flame, not a blaze. The hawks rose as one when Emma's shift ended, engines firing in the golden light, a convoy forming without command. They rode her home under clearing skies, the wind drying the last of the rain from their faces, the road humming with unspoken redemption. Big Mike rode point, Tom bringing up the rear, their silhouettes etched against the horizon like guardians carved from the earth's own grit. In the weeks that followed, the town shifted subtly, whispers turning to nods at the diner, the sheriff's patrols easing into reluctant alliances. Emma healed, her steps lighter behind the counter, the scar above her eye fading into a mark of survival. Jax visited often, not as leader but as kin, sharing stories by the jukebox, tales of rides that mended souls, losses that forged unbreakable bonds. The Iron Hawks became more than shadows. They were the quiet force that stepped in where others faltered, their code a testament to humanity's undercurrent of kindness. One evening, as dusk painted the highway in soft purples, Jack stood with Emma outside the diner, the lot empty save for his bike idling like a patient friend. "Strength isn't the roar," he said, his voice gravelly with the day's miles, eyes on the fading light. "It's the stand when no one's looking." She nodded, the weight of forgiveness settling between them, a bridge over past regrets, loyalty's quiet hum echoing in the cooling air. The road stretched on, curving into tomorrow, but in that shared silence, redemption bloomed, a fragile flower in the dust of forgotten places. In the end, what lingered wasn't the rumble of engines or the sting of rain, but the truth that courage hides in the hearts of the judged, weaving justice from threads of compassion no storm could unravel. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of the Iron Hawk's Silent Watch. See you in the next one.